Hello, everyone. This video is going to be about the effects that collective fear has on a community. Just a disclaimer, this video is not going to be organized at all. I'm just going to be rambling essentially. Um, but it's just a thought that I had recently while I was walking. And, you know, I was thinking to myself that fear, when you view things, right, whether it's an individual or a group of people, when you analyze their behavior, and you look at it through a perspective of fear, you can start to understand why certain people and certain groups may do things that may not typically make sense under normal circumstances. And when you view things through the lens of collective paranoia, you start to understand that groups as a whole can experience a form of psychosis in the form of fear. And there is some points I want to mention today regarding multiple communities. It's going to be October 7th soon. Next month will be October 7th. And that will officially be, what, 2 years now that the current situation in Gaza is going on. And this has brought a lot of people's attention to, the situation between Israel and Palestine. And, a lot of people who typically were not thinking about this, or maybe they didn't care, or maybe they still don't care, but they're just aware of the situation. It has brought them, to not only acknowledge the situation, but to speculate on how things got to be where they're at. And it's one thing to study the history, just like the surface level history of both the groups of Palestinians and the Israelis. But it's another thing to actually delve deep into the cultures and to understand why. Why is this happening? And I think this is one of the best examples that we could possibly analyze to understand the effects that collective fear has on a people. And I would like to start with the Israelis or Jews. You know, a lot of what Israel is doing now, I seriously believe could just be explained as collective mass paranoia on the Jewish side. If you analyze Jewish history, right, going back pretty much as long as, Israelite people have existed, you'll see a constant theme of struggle, right? In the Bible, in the Old Testament, especially, Jews are constantly, kicked out of their homeland. They're expelled, and then they're brought back, and they reign for a bit. They're independent, then they get conquered and subjugated. Maybe, according to the Bible, enslaved, so on and so. Um, so there's a theme of this amongst Israelite people, or people we would claim to be Israelites. And when you also analyze uh, the history of the Jewish people in Europe post Roman exile, and you know the stories of the persecutions, the expulsions, the pogroms, it starts to make sense why, you know, in the late 19th century, a movement started to take hold of the Jewish psyche, which is known as Zionism, right? It starts to make sense, the origins of Zionism. Where does it come from? What's its origins? Uh, what was Theodore Herzl thinking about? What exactly formulate this idea? Because I think it is natural for people to want self determination. That is natural, but that feeling of the want of self determination is exacerbated whenever there has been some sort of persecution. And so when you look at the lead up, right, to the Holocaust, during the Holocaust, and after the Holocaust, I think you could easily say that the way Israel behaves now and the cruelty they behave with now is just a buildup of just fear within the Jewish community that Maybe they ain't get us this time. Maybe we ain't wipe us out this time, but there will be another Holocaust. There'll be another Shoah, and then we won't be, what's the word? We won't be so lucky next time. We'll be dealt with, properly. We'll be fine. They'll finally finish us off. And once you view it like that, you understand why they're doing what they're doing. And this isn't justifying, any of the actions of the Israeli government, of course. Um, but it's just understanding why they behave like this, why they act like this, why are they so cruel and hostile to everyone? Because their whole goal, because you have the Greater Israel Project, right? They don't want a small Israel. Now they have their state. Yes, they have their state. They got it in 1948, but that's to expand. Because right now Israel still is it's a small state, and without Western backing, it wouldn't be able to survive. We see like recently with the last clash, a 12-day war between Israel and Iran. Israel got pelted hard with Iranian missiles, and if it wasn't for the West, particularly America, supplying Israel, with modern fighter jets, Israel would not have been able to fight back in a coherent manner in the way they did, recently in the war. So you get to see the Jewish psyche and why they behave like this. And I think that the cruelty you see the Israeli state engage in is a mixture of this paranoia, endless stream of paranoia that's built up in the Jewish zeitgeist over the past 2,000 or so years. But then I also think it comes down to a matter of religion and culture. Um, I think when you have a people, right, who have a religion which is ethnocentric in nature, right, we are God's chosen, and you put that with, the the hostility they may face from other groups, right? I think you will eventually end up with something very deadly and dangerous, like what we have in Israel today. Not to mention, right, Zionism came about in a certain time period where things that we would not consider acceptable today are considered acceptable. For example, Zionism was always intended as a colonial ideology, always, always intended as a colonial ideology. And we can see today it clearly is a colonial ideology. It behaves, I mean, basically like settler colonialism. You could argue that Israel is essentially no different from America during the early stages, or Australia, or Canada, or you know, I'm looking at a map right now, a good portion of like South American countries, right, where these European countries would just send out their people and just oppress the local population, oppress the natives, and take their stuff, take their land, take their whatever it may be. Um, so we can see that Israel is not only a mixture of the brutality of settler colonialism, right, which was popular 300 years ago. It's a mixture of ethnocentrism and it's a mixture of paranoia. And so now we have something very, very, very dangerous. And and it's not like you can't understand why, the Jews may behave this way. Jews were constantly attacked all throughout Europe during the Middle Ages and even going into like the more modern era, because they didn't really assimilate. They didn't properly assimilate into, European society. Because you can even see it today with the Romani people in Eastern Europe. They don't assimilate. They're still very much Romani. They have their own culture, right? Uh, if you go to Europe and you see the way they live, it's like they live like it's like a parallel society, right? There's a broader European country or wherever you're at, and there's a Romani society of wherever you're at. They have their own culture. They have basically their own stuff. Like they do things their way, and they face heavy persecution because of this. Um, and one thing I will say is that groups that don't assimilate well, people view them and they watch them, right? Because now they're curious. What makes you so different? Why aren't you assimilating? What's different about you? Why are you so resistant to our ways? Um, and that oftentimes builds up resentment and hatred and It can even lead to violence. Uh, and I would like to mention another group. Um, I think I'm gonna kind of split this up, but I want to mention white Americans and just the white race in general. Uh, I feel that a lot of things you see that individual white people and just the white collective behaviors they engage in, you can clearly sum up as a response of having a deep sense of fear, right? Because the white race, the ancestors, right, of modern day white people went around the world doing very terrible things to various different people, right? And a lot of them have a built up, fear of retaliation from these people. What will happen if they unify and they develop, and eventually they can challenge us. And I think this is one thing you see that Anglo society is particularly scared of China. Anglo society is particularly scared of the rise of China because if you know the history, the British they put opium in China. They did, this you can just go, research, the whole century of humiliation, which led to what we have now in China, right? The development of China now is driven by that want to avoid anything like that ever again. And what I'm noticing is that Anglos, it seems like out of all white people, tend to be the most scared of retaliation because they've done, we could probably argue, the most to non-white people in general. Because look, you have America, I'm looking at a map again, America, Anglo society, Canada, Anglo society for the most part, Australia, New Zealand. Then you have the big one, the UK, I mean, or just England, but you know, these are all settler colonies. The UK isn't a settler colony. Well, you could argue this. I mean, the Anglo-Saxons aren't from, they aren't from Britain, but but that's talk for another day. But um, all these nations were founded upon oppression, and so a lot of white people are scared of, what happens if black people in particular rise up, or this group that we harm rise up and, you know, strike back against us for what we did in the past. Because the thing is, sure, the people today who are alive, they may not have done it. They may not have done whatever we talked about in the past, right? All the crimes that may have been committed in the past. Did these modern day white people do it? No. So you can't really hold them accountable for things they didn't do, for things their ancestors did. But the thing is, attitudes that led to tragedies and things in the past, they don't just go away. And there's this enduring myth that I see amongst people where we believe that because a certain amount of time has passed, that will just somehow, wash, away a certain mentality or behavior from people. Like it'll just go away, it'll just die out naturally, which can happen a lot of times, but you'll notice this doesn't really happen with racism or just any sort of like superiority complex. This is very unlikely to happen because generally speaking, it feels good to feel like you're better than someone else. It feels good. But that's one thing that humans love, feeling better than someone else, right? Even if it's at the, even if we have to go out of our way to put someone else down just to feel better than them, then we will do that. We will. And so when it comes to things like, any sort of supremacy, this isn't just going to go away just on its own. Where people just say, "Oh, you know, uh, we're done with that. That's wrong." It will definitely decrease in its vitriol and its potency, right? White supremacy nowadays is nowhere near what it used to be, right? But it's still here. It's still here, and the way you defeat it is by actually taking a stance against what against what created, right? And what we need is proper education in society. We need proper education. So white white history needs to be taught in totality. Because even going through school in the West, we mostly focus on Western topics, just to be expected. We are in the West, but we rarely branched out to non-Western civilizations. And When we did, it was very brief, short, and disorganized. But even then, when we are talking about Western civilizations, it's not really to the degree that we should, right? We a lot of times, because like I remember, I forget what year it was, but I was in back when I was in, I think it was either middle or high school. We talked about, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was the Roman Empire, and then we went to the Civil War, the American Civil War. And it's like we just jumped so many centuries. And we just talked about the Roman Empire. They didn't even specify a time, who was emperor. They didn't even specify any of that. And so the way we're taught, even Western history, is disjointed and not proper. So of course, they're not going to teach non-Western history properly. So we need to teach Western history properly. We need to be taught about the accomplishments of white people, the things they did good, things they did bad. You need to be taught it entirely because I don't like the disrespect that history receives in our curriculum. History is disrespected severely. Everyone's history, even white history, even though it's the most covered, is still very disrespected. I want to learn about more niche topics of European history in school. I like that. Like, well, I'm out of school, but growing up, I would have loved it. But then furthermore, we need to learn about non-Western civilizations in a complete manner. We need to learn about the civilizations of the natives that were here. We need to learn about the civilizations of, as I said, Europeans. We need to learn about the civilizations of North Africa, the Amazigh people. We need to learn about um, Semitic / Middle Eastern civilizations. We need to learn about Iranians. We need to learn about East Asia. We need to learn about India. And we need to learn about Sub-Saharan Africa because we leave Sub-Saharan Africa out a lot. Actually, completely. We've never talked about Africa in history class, as far as I'm aware, unless it was about like colonialism or slavery. And this is to build, an inferiority complex in the black psyche to believe that the only thing you've ever been was a slave and colonized. Um, but I say this to say that if we could do this, this would do two things. It would it would definitely weaken the racial divide we have in this country, or just globally. If this was adopted globally, this would drop racism down significantly. Because now, once you've learned everyone's history in depth, it becomes very hard, if not impossible, to be racist. You can still be prejudiced and say, I don't like these people, but it becomes very hard to look at someone else and say, I'm better than you because I was born this way. It becomes very hard. I would say it almost becomes impossible. It becomes impossible once you really, and I don't mean like just some brief, you watch a video online about this civilization. I mean, you really study their history in depth. It becomes almost impossible to really look at someone else and say, I'm better than you because I was born. It's hard. It becomes hard because now you're aware of the things your people did right and the things your people did wrong. And you're aware of what their people did right and did wrong. And so you realize that at the end of the day, we're all just people. Really, we're all just people. Um, and so this would get rid of a good portion of the racism we have. This also removed the the victim complex we see amongst many minority groups, but especially Black people. Black people have a very big victim complex, and you can't necessarily blame them because all we're taught about is when we were victimized. So that's kind of what you should expect from Black people, right? So yeah, I was just saying that this is something that you should expect from Black people because we're just taught to be victims essentially. Um, so what I was saying is that white people, you know, they have a lot of built up fear, similar to Jewish people. Jews are white, depending on who you ask, but they have a lot of built up fear, similar to Jewish people, but for different reasons. And the reason why, it's for opposite reasons, really. Um, as I said, it's because, it's a fear of what if these people strike back against us? What if they, get together and form a coalition against us? And so you can see a lot of actions now that's being done, racist actions being done nowadays. It's not necessarily out of hatred. It's more so out of just, you know, keeping a people down so they don't rise up against you. Um, that's why I think that most of racism today, especially like what Black America may face, and even on the African continent, um, and you could argue going into the Middle East too, it's now a matter of don't ever let these people rise again. Never. Don't let them rise because if they do rise, we're done. I think this also could go with this could explain why Israel is so ardent and staunch against the Palestinians. Is it due to hatred? Obviously, of course, no one would deny that. All it has to do with what if we let them. What if Israel left Palestine alone right now? Right? They left. Okay, let's say they took Gaza, they kicked or killed all the Palestinians, but they left the West Bank and they were allowed to develop. And let's say they left them alone completely. They didn't intervene at all. Do we think that the people of the West Bank would just forget about what happened over the past 70 something years? Do you think that they'd forget what's going on right now? And do they just forgive? Likely not. So you get to see um, from two perspectives what collective fear can do to a people, and it can make them go crazy. Because you're starting to see a rise in right wing, right wing extremism and nationalism amongst young white men, and it's because of a fear of losing their position, you know, on the world stage. With the rise of China and with African countries now starting to take back their resources and unify, like with the AES in the Sahel, in West Africa, you know, uh, France is undergoing an extreme economic crisis. And I need to talk about that. I haven't uploaded a video on that. But you can see the white world that we live in is over. It's ending. Not to say that white people are going away, but it's just the white world we live in. White/European birth rates are dropping significantly. Meanwhile, many of the births in Europe are by migrants or by refugees, people who are not white, foreigners. And so, in many aspects, white people are losing their place where they used to be the default race almost essentially. There's a lot of people, even non-white people, they think of a human, they probably think of a white person because white people are just so dominant in the psyche of everyone that it causes a fear response. Like we're losing our place and we may end up, in a weak position like those we mistreat. And I'm going to expand on this in the next video where we're going to talk about France's current economic situation. But for now, thank you for watching.